Steve, you were at PlatformCon. Bob, you were
At cdCon.
cdCon. Yeah. Any interesting insights either if you want to jump into the main
Yeah, I think
conversation
one of
points?
probably one of the most interesting things that I noticed at cdCon was well, I don't know if it was really the organizers who did this, but a lot of the sessions were really focused in on supply chain security, talking about SBOMs quite extensively. And also, how do you basically why they're so important, why you have to, how do you consume them, how do you do all these other things with them, but then also going along verifying that yes, the artifacts that I built in phase one in my build process, that's the thing that's actually getting deployed out to production and making sure that that hasn't been manipulated or tampered with or anything like that. It was very interesting. There were a lot of open source projects that were mentioned. I think that after the first day, there was another Octonaut. He was sitting next to me. I was like, this was very SBOM heavy. This first day, it was like every other, I want to say every session, like the first 3 or 4 sessions in a row were like all focused on SBOMs. So I think one of the things that we kind of run into with SBOMs is once you generate the SBOM, what do you do with it? And I'd love to get your thoughts on that, Steve. Like, are there any like what would you do with the SBOM after you have it? I have my own thoughts, but I'd be curious to see what your thoughts were first.
Yeah, I love this because for a lot of organizations, they're like, you're supposed to do something afterwards. Um, the funny thing is, doesn't this all kind of go back to that one package that caused the huge disruption? And in the aftermath, was it Log4j? I think it was.
Log4j,
Um,
but they also mentioned things like the XC exploit as well, where
yeah,
you could inject some other package that you weren't expecting, or a version of a package that you weren't expecting that was more like a transient reference versus just an explicit reference.
yeah,
That
and I think
kind of
the
caused some of the problems as well.
yeah, that's right. And the aftermath was that we realized that um everyone was very interested very suddenly whether you were using this package, and nobody could answer whether they were or not. That was
Hmm.
like this situation. And so in a way, having an S bomb and not doing anything with it at least gets you over that issue, right? You now have the place to look. It's a list of all the things I'm using. Is the vulnerable package in this list? Um, but you would hope that what with us all loving automation, and wanting to do even better than just having a list of things, is that something should be reading your SBOM and keeping you updated if there's anything that needs your attention so that you can respond super swiftly. And I suppose we've all taken Dependabot for granted, which I suppose is a version of this. Um,
Hmm.
if it can give you the pull request for you to review and just accept, great. That sounds like the ideal answer, right? It's like heal my application for me, and that will be just great.
Yeah, it's I'm kind of in that same boat. It's great to have the SBOM, and I think that's a very much a first step, because I don't think people realize that when you bring in a package, you're bringing in that package's dependencies, and then all of their dependencies, and then all of their dependencies. It's a big spider web that could end up. I think that of the of the languages that are out there, when you start dealing with, say, Node apps, they tend to be the most notorious to have those things, because there are so many packages that people do just to avoid code rewrite. Even for like the simplest things. One of the examples that was given in an open discussion when we were at Continuous Delivery Con was like, this one guy's like, we had a package that all it was doing was string concatenation. I'm like, what? So it was like, that's the craziest thing you've heard. I mean, it's like it should be either built into the language or use some native language things. But no, we had to create a whole library for it, bring in the package. And so you really don't a lot of times, like when I bring in a package, it might just be my application might directly reference only maybe like 10 packages, but those 10 packages could end up referencing thousands of others when it's all said and done. And so you don't see the actual recipe. It's kind of similar to when if you've ever made a cake from the cake mix. Yes, you know that you're putting in, the eggs and the sugar and everything like that, but you don't know all the chemicals that are part of the actual cake mix itself. All you see is just the cake mix itself, and that's all you get. And it's kind of very similar to when you do one of those packages. Like, you have a lot of control over some of the ingredients, but not a lot of them. So they'll have CVEs, and I think that's one of the biggest problems is that they'll have the CVEs. Those referenced packages will have the CVEs way, way buried down, and you may not realize that you have some sort of exploit that it could occur within your application. So back to your point of, yes, you need to have some sort of automated system that will review your references and constantly update your application and at the very least notify you. Because I think the biggest thing to understand is that you may not be vulnerable today when you build your application, but you can't be vulnerable tomorrow, even if nothing's changed in your application because some new CV came out because of some package that you may or may not have referenced. And so being made aware of that, I think, is a big part of it. But yeah, it is. It's kind of interesting that we have to have this formal thing back to when you think about Dependabot's been around for seems like forever. Certainly, it seems like it predated SBOMs. So it was a very interesting thing to see happen as a result of this kind of vulnerability.
Yeah. How about you, Steve? How was PlatformCon on your side?
Yeah, PlatformCon was really vibrant. Actually, they had a really great host who, every time they got onto the stage, they managed to pour energy back into the room, which was really good because like you're taking on so much information that like by the end of the talk, you're quite tired out and your brain is hot. But yeah, they kind of built the energy back up each time. And yeah, I mean, the things that stood out for me, quite a few of the talks covered this a bit, but thinnest viable platform, I think, is
Mm.
something that we've had that as long as we've had platform engineering. People have always said, what is the smallest platform that you can build? But I think over time, it's one of the most likely things you're going to forget as a platform team, and you're going to start. Nikki described it as platform bloat, where you just end up solving lots more problems and growing the amount of platform you have, and then you end up in a situation where maybe one of the tools that you've abstracted away is having periods of innovation that are no longer available to your users because your platform's now in the way. So you end up with all of this friction um, being caused by your platform. So yeah, there's like a big reminder this year to start trimming, right? Working out what lines of code do you really want to own versus where you can actually lean on other things. There's so much stuff out there. So like lean on the things that do the stuff well and just bring it all together. Like you don't really want to put too much in people's way. So that
Mm.
was a big one. And there was lots of discussions about metrics. We find this a lot. People always want to know how to measure stuff, and we
Hmm.
get this in the Dora community. We see it a lot in the platform community. And we offered up the Monk metrics for this because they give you three very generic measures that can apply to all platform engineering teams, plus a reminder that you need to have contextual metrics. And those contextual metrics are what is going to keep you funded over the long term. So if you aren't if you aren't tying your platform back to that business value, someone eventually is going to have like a spreadsheet with numbers on, and they're going to be like, "Why are we spending this?" And no one's going to have an answer. So, like, if you haven't already heard of the Monk metrics, come and grab them. We have articles about it. They are going to help. And ultimately, what we don't want is for platforms to become financially abandoned with all of these developers still depending on them. And then it's going to be like, the platform will have evolved to 2026 and then it just stops. And then by 2027, it's just holding everyone back and it's actually doing the opposite of what a platform should do. So yeah,
Yeah.
metrics came up a lot and we think we know the answer to that. So
Mm.
I think metrics are always interesting because people want to see them, but again, it's like, what do you do? What's the intended activity once you have those metrics? Um, Sometimes, I mean, they can be good indications of smells or any sort of problems. My favorite use case is the code coverage metric. How much, how much of your code is covered by your unit tests? And you can never get 100% code coverage. That's just not a feasible thing because there's always going to be some sort of interaction with the like within the OS or within some sort of server or some sort of external dependency that you just can't get. So like okay, well let's get to 90%. I'm like okay, I mean sure. Um, so anything, but really, really anything above like 80%, it's like okay, that's good, but are they actually useful tests? That's kind of what I come back to is, yes,
Yeah.
I've quote unquote covered my code with a unit test because I've exercised it via unit test. But if I don't have the right asserts, if I don't check things appropriately, if I'm not mocking out the appropriate case, any number of those different things, yeah, you end up in a situation where yeah, you have code coverage, but you're not really truly doing anything with it. But if you have 25% code coverage, that's a clear indication that there's a problem. And so there's some, I think at some point they're like the metrics, they're good for smelling up until a point, and then it's like you need to have a lot more nuance and carefree, careful evaluation of it. I think back to like if you look at like some of the DORA metrics, like deployment frequency as an example. If you're deploying once a quarter, that's clearly a smell. That's clearly that there's something that needs to improve. If you're deploying once a week or once every couple days, you're doing really well. And is that good enough? Maybe. Maybe that's what the business wants. Maybe the business is fine with just deploying every couple of days or once a week, and that's fine. So yes, there's. I think at some point you kind of get this, like the balance shifts on the metric, where it becomes like a clear indication you need to fix something. To, I really need to dive in and really understand if I want to improve this, or if we've reached kind of the state of time to move on to something else to fix.
It also makes me laugh that when people start out with something like Dora metrics, um, they ask loads of questions. We see it on like the community. They're asking really detailed questions. How precisely should I measure my deployment frequency? Right? They're like really precise about it. And you're like, well, how often do you deploy? And they're like, annually. And the precision really doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
If you're kind of annually, kind of twice a year, doesn't really matter. So, and then at the other end of the scale, when you're deploying on demand, like each time you've changed a bit of code, you then still don't care about the precision because you're not really trying to improve that anymore. You don't need to deploy more often than you have a code change. So yeah, I kind of think there's an interesting thing with precision that people want it when it's completely irrelevant, and then by the time they get to a point where precision would be needed, it becomes irrelevant, but for a different reason.
Oh yeah, 100%. Changing topics slightly, Mike, I guess one thing that I'm curious about is how often did AI come up at your conference? Because it came up a couple of times, but I'd be kind of curious to see, like, are there any discussions around AI, using AI for your IDPs or generating platforms or generating pipelines or anything like that?
Yeah, so opening panel discussion.
Yeah.
They tried really hard not to talk about AI until a specific segment at the end of the panel discussion, which was tough. And it's the conversation is everywhere. I think the interesting thing is there's a lot of curiosity in the platform engineering space about like we know people want to use AI for stuff. What stuff am I doing that this could apply to? Like in that
Yeah.
platform engineering space, where does it fit? Can I use it for something? And so there's a lot of searching for use cases for AI. So yeah, there's definitely appetite for it, but just not necessarily a strong story about like this is something where AI could do something we can't already do. In a lot of cases, a little bit like AI is great for looking through your log file that was generated and trying to find the interesting bits of it. But there are also like deterministic ways of doing that where you know if something's being logged as a warning or an error or info. So you instead of presenting the whole log file to an end user, you can zoom in, right? Where did the error? Where's the first error in this log file?
Yeah.
Let's zoom into that. So it's like at the moment, I think there's desire, but not yet a strong. This is definitely the area to use it.
Yeah, we had a pretty robust discussion the second day over lunch. It was kind of like an open discussion within the room where we were talking about AI, and specifically in continuous delivery. And I think one of the most interesting statements someone made is, we run the pipeline 100 times, 1,000 times more than we'll write the pipeline. So using AI to generate a pipeline, especially if it's non-deterministic, like you have no idea what it's going to create, you have no idea how it's going to work, how do you debug it, how do you fix it? There was very little appetite for that in the room, full of continuous delivery practitioners from major corporations, and like, this is not something that I'm looking to solve, because if writing the pipeline was the hardest bits, we would have automated that out years and years and years ago. Just like if writing the code, that's never been the hardest part about software engineering. It's it certainly is difficult to do well, but it's never been the hardest part. The hardest part is determining what to write. And oftentimes that's the same thing with your software delivery pipeline. But what people really had an appetite for was kind of back to what you were alluding to a little bit, which was, okay, a deployment has failed, something has occurred. I would love to use AI to go out to the docs, go out to the knowledge bases, go out to all the various things, evaluate the logs, and determine what caused that failure. But I think it tells a bigger story, which is you really need to focus in on offloading some of the low value tasks that your platform engineers might do or your DevOps engineers might do, which is debugging these failed deployments and really enabling that self-service for the developers so they can quickly get back up and running and go, okay, this is what caused that failure. And sometimes the failure might be something that the developer can't fix. And what they need to do is they just need to go up and escalate that to the appropriate people that have that expertise, that have that knowledge, that have all of that information. And so I think that was kind of like the big thing it was really kind of eye-opening for me, was when we had those kind of discussions, was how well that was received when I said, hey, we have an AI assistant today that evaluates the logs and tells you this is why your deployment failed. This is how it's going. This is some suggestions on how to fix it. And then if that doesn't work, then go ahead and escalate it up to your support people. And everyone's like, I
Yeah.
am very interested in that. That is something I would love to see, because it would offload so much of the work and get that enabling of that self-service. We're not saying we should replace the platform engineers. We're just saying we just want to take away some of that low value tasks. And that, I think that's really kind of a interesting use case that has always seemed to generate the most interest in my mind.
And this makes sense. Like when Sherlock Holmes was investigating a case, he had this squad of street boys who he could send out to go and gather information so Sherlock Holmes could spend his time trying to crack the case. And
Yeah.
that's kind of what we're doing here, right? It's like you get to still be Sherlock Holmes, but all these people are going to bring you information, and it's a AI bot, but it's bringing all that information to you. It's going to go and find important parts of it. It's going to, the ideal world, all of those manual things where you would go and get a piece from all these different places, that's just done for you. And, I kind of dream of it saying, well, the last time this happened,
Yeah.
this is how you solved it. That's going to be great because
Yeah.
it's very rare to find any problem that you haven't dealt with before.
Oh yeah. And I think the only difference is with Sherlock Holmes in this particular case, sometimes with code failures or deployment failures, you're both the investigator and the murderer at the exact same time. So you're trying to, like, Sherlock Holmes is trying to put himself in jail in that particular case. But yeah. And then the another really kind of going back to that information, it's more than just debugging deployment failures. It also can be used as a way to tell me exactly what I'm looking at, because if you look at some deployment processes, they could be 20, 30, 40, 50 line, steps. Okay, summarize. Tell me a little bit more about this, especially if you're someone that's brand new to the organization and it's just like, how do I just consume all of this information that's being thrown at me in a much more easy way? Um, but then sometimes some AI responses tend to be like very robust, and,
Mm.
and so you end up with just as much information to read, but maybe it's a little bit slightly better formatted for you to understand. But yes, I think, like, back to your point of gathering all of this information and summarizing it in an appropriate way and helping you out and saying, I would love to also see, like you said, the last time this happened, this is how it was resolved. That would be awesome to see something like that.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
it's even useful if you just want to say, which projects are using the Slack notification step,
Exactly.
right? It's like, I don't want to go and find that out.
Yeah. Yeah. It goes back to low value versus high value tasks. It's a low value task to go out and see, hey, how many projects are using this Slack notification? Now, the high value task is what you do with that information. It could be, well, I need to go in and I need to swap it out from Slack to Teams, or I need to update the formatting of the message or anything along those lines. That's the high value task of
Yeah.
understanding of what I need to do with that information.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was doing. I was reformatting the message because I wanted to humble brag on social about how often we were deploying the stuff we're working on, but I
Mm.
couldn't screenshot it because the message wasn't nicely formatted and gave out like information that I didn't want to include in a screenshot. So yeah, that was my exact use case, was looking for those, reformatting the message so I could take a screenshot and just brag.
See, I solved that problem a long time ago. So now years and years ago, I can't remember when it was, but I now every time I stand up an Octopus instance, I have what I call a notifications variable set that has all the Slack notification, email notification messages all pre-formatted and ready to go. So it's like I've solved this problem years ago. I never want to have to think about this again. So I just plop them in every single time. So anytime now I need to change the message, I just have to go to that single variable set and bam,
Nice.
done. Don't have to think about
Yeah,
this.
that's very smart.
Yeah. Future me definitely is very thankful for past me. Sometimes past me definitely does a number on future me.
Yeah. Yeah, like when you do something like that and you're all prepared, you're like, I'm awesome. And then
Yeah.
sometimes I open up a bit of code I wrote and I'm like, wow, I'm a fraud.
Yeah. It's like, who was the giant mind who wrote this? Like, oh, I'm the sole author. Uh,
Yeah, that's right. Get blame. And it's like, it's just a finger pointing back at you. It's like,
yeah.
oh,
I think the AI conversation is like, even take it out of code. There's so many marketing use cases now with AI, and it's the same thing. People are wading into areas where they have no right being because they either haven't, they're just, oh, I can shortcut it now. And it's similar in any career industry. If you're using AI to try to shortcut 5, 10 years of knowledge, you're probably going to end up in a not a great place eventually. But to your point, if it's like, here's these, you'd call them low value tasks, but like they take me maybe an hour or 2 hours every time. If I can get that, process it quicker, it's like, why would you not repeat that over months? And you're like, this is fantastic. That kind of feels like the good landing zone for AI, but it's kind of like we need to find that 5% and then amplify it to be the 95%. It feels
Yeah.
like we're the other way around now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's also important to understand that it does tend to go towards the median when you
Yeah.
use AI. And I think that's really important to understand. So what I mean by that is like it goes towards the median and also uses pattern matching. So when there's something it has seen and it's very, very familiar, absolutely. When you ask it to, hey, I want you to help me edit this doc, and I want you to do it in the style of Hemingway, there is a lot of examples out there that it can use. It knows the rules. It can very much help you out in that particular case. Um, Steve, I see you have a guitar behind you. I have guitars behind you. I mean, everyone knows that, once you start playing guitar, like almost every popular song, it's E minor, G, C, D. Almost every popular song has those four chords in some sort of progression and some sort of strumming pattern if you're playing guitar. And so if you ask AI, hey, could you help me write a pop song? It's probably going to do pretty good because, it's always going to be about falling in love or, the past or, reminiscing on something. And it uses those four chords. Absolutely, you can get something like that. So when it's something that's very familiar and very similar, absolutely you can do something like that. I think back to your point, Tony, where it doesn't really do a super great job when it is being asked to do something that's never been done before. So if we go back to the music analogy, you're never going to get a revolution like Bob Dylan or the Beatles if everything else before that looked the same and acted the same. If we go to a little more contemporary, you're never going to get like NWA or Rage Against the Machine when you're looking at rock and roll from the 1980s. So you're never going to get that kind of that evolution of that next thing. And so when we bring it back to coding, it's really good for scaffolding and helping you set up a number of those kind of back to those low value tasks. But you're going to have to fill in everything else and make it very worthwhile. So if you ask it, hey, I need you to generate a pipeline for me, yeah, it can probably generate a very basic pipeline that's kind of standard, but it's not going to be adherent probably to your company policies. It's not definitely not going to probably work for your application. There's probably going to be something that you're going to have to modify. So as long as you go in knowing that, I think you're going to be much better off rather than assuming it's just going to write everything for you. Like, don't use it to say write legal briefs all the way through.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Which people have been doing, interestingly. I have to credit Liam from Slash Data because he says, don't use AI to do something that you couldn't do, because
Yeah.
that's when you end up in the situation where you can't judge the result of it. And I think, in a way, a lot of the very revolutionary comments about AI are always about someone else's job, but of course they can't do my job. That's what you hear a lot. So, if someone, is a poet, they'll say, well, AI is okay for writing a blog post, but you can't write a poem with it, right? Because they've tried it and it doesn't do what they would do. And then the person writing blog posts will be like, well, you can't write a blog post with it, but you can do poetry, right?
Yeah.
Because it's almost like there's that gap. So I think it's fair that you should probably know what you're doing so that you can judge the result. And ideally, you are the one controlling the whole narrative. Like if I'm writing an article, I don't want AI to write it because I've got some really strong opinions, and
Yeah.
they're not
Yeah.
going to come out, right? If I use AI to do that, I want my strong opinions to come out. But like I can imagine situations where I could give it. I'm British, but I am supposed to write in US English, so I could say, can you fix all of my British English and make it US English? That would be okay.